Okay,
What was I thinking?
All right.
are we ready?
Yes, action.
Okay. Can you tell me why it's important to keep the individual receiving services at the center of everything that you do as a caregiver?
I believe so. The whole point of person-centered planning and why we put the focus on the individual is that I would equate it to your life. When you want to do something in your life, you don't want somebody else telling you what you can do or what you're allowed to do or over limiting your choices. You want to have a say. You want to have a voice. And so the whole idea behind honoring the individual is to give them a voice. Oftentimes I talk about our caregivers as giving voice to the voiceless. If you're raising children and you are constantly telling them what to do, how will they learn? And how will they make meaningful connections in their world based on what it is that they like, what their gifts are, what their talents are, what they need, what they want, and how they relate to the world in general. They have to have that opportunity to interact with the world on their terms. And sometimes with people with disabilities, what we do is we, as professionals, make judgments and we impose what we think their life should look like or their choices should look like, how they should interact with the world, what they should choose to do, what they should choose to wear, what they should choose to think, when in fact most people with disabilities are intact personalities. They have unique ways of communicating, and they have unique, they have unique talents and gifts. I know I've already said that. Oh well, edit that out. But they have a unique way of looking at the world and interacting with it. And by honoring them first and allowing them to find their voice and facilitating that voice, we make the world a better place.
Good.
Makes
Wow.
me want to cry.
Very nice.
That's it, you're done.
No, not quite. Very nice.
Okay, so how does that, that person-centered approach,
Yes, can we just redo the hair once more?
Flip your hair,
Flip
Terri.
your hair back.
Now, what do you?
Was it back the other time?
Well,
Oh.
Up on your right shoulder. Yep.
there we go. Oh,
Yep.
there we
like
go.
that.
Thank you.
In other words, don't touch the hair. It's a nervous gesture. Give me a break.
Oh, okay, I will.
okay,
I'm gonna ask you one thing now. Can you kind of turn, you're kind of leaning back that way? Can you lean back with that side? Then
Like
there
that
you
way?
go. Yep, then you're facing more at Margaret. Great.
Okay.
And roll them.
okay. How does the person-centered approach differ from a systems approach, system-centered approach? And why is it more important to be person-centered?
In a systems approach, it's about efficiency, it's about safety, it is about allowing the facility or the program to dictate how things are done, whether that's when medications are distributed, whether it's what time you get up in the morning, what time meals are prepared. In a systems approach or in a systems environment, you are going to have individual service plans, individual program plans, which are drafted and dictated by the professionals. And they're really oftentimes off in a room, again, very well-meaning, they're good people, they're well-trained, they care deeply about what they do. But oftentimes you'll find that they're off in an office and they are actually crafting something based on what they think they know, and it actually doesn't involve the individual that's receiving the support or being offered assistance at all. Again, they are not given the opportunity to help craft that very plan for their life that they will then be living. And so in a systems approach, there's very little choice, there's very little engagement, there's very little honoring of that individual and what it is that they need, want, desire. Conversely, in a person-centered approach, we use outcomes. We don't talk about the process, the product. We talk about the process and the product. It's a journey with a destination, but the journey is as desirable as the destination. And by engaging that individual in a conversation, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Who do you want to live with? What community do you want to live in? Do you want a dog? Do you want a cat, a goldfish? What is it about your life that engages you, that gives meaning to it and purpose? Why do you get up in the morning? I often, when I'm teaching about our values as a company, I ask people, why do you get up in the morning? And generally speaking, they can tell me, I just got a new car, I had a new baby, I'm going to get married, I love my dog, and I love going for walks in the fall. If we don't have reason and purpose, if you have an individual living in a home whose choices are dictated by others and whose purpose is dictated by others, why would I want to get up and go to a meaningless job that's a piecemeal where I'm putting nuts and bolts in a bag? How does that lend purpose to my life? And where does my hope come from? I don't have hope because, again, somebody else is making my decisions for me. So it's an imperative that we get away and we move away from a systems approach, because life is not lived in an office and it's not dictated by others. Life is lived in the here and now, being present, having engagement with the community, with my family, with my friends, with my boyfriend or my girlfriend, and with those activities that lend meaning and purpose to my life.
What can we do with that sound coming up? Okay.
You know, I'm really sorry. I forgot to take an allergy pill this morning, and it's wrecking havoc with my voice.
Oh, no.
Oh, it sounds
there's
great.
Oh,
no,
the
the
vent-
heat.
the vent
No,
of
Margaret
the
wasn't
heat.
commenting on
Yeah, no, it was out, kind of in the middle of that.
the
that
heat
furnace
was
or
kicking
whatever.
in. No, you're doing really well.
Yeah. Okay, so how does each party benefit from a person-centered approach? You know, there's obviously, as a caregiver, what do I get out of using person-centered concepts with the people I'm supporting?
In my reality, I find it impossible to divorce a person-centered approach from life. I think that for all of us, whether we are care recipients or caregivers, the more we have an opportunity to make meaningful connections and meaningful choices based on the ability to have choice. Oftentimes people with disabilities aren't even given an opportunity to make a choice because they don't know what's out there. If I've lived in an institutional environment where most of my decisions have been made for me, how do I know what a good choice is? Because I don't know maybe that there are restaurants that aren't fast food and that I can go in and I can sit down and I can have somebody wait on me if all I've experienced is fast food. And in the end, I might really prefer fast food, but on the other hand, I might discover that I like fine dining. And I think that for all caregivers and all care recipients, that is the case. If we take person-centered planning outside of a normal or a natural context and apply it in a clinical way, it becomes artificial, and all of a sudden now I am really going to get what it is that you want to have happen in your life. When rather, if I can simply engage you in a conversation, all of a sudden we might have a visceral connection, a real heart connection over something that we both value. We both love children. You love babies? Oh, I love babies too. And all of a sudden, the next time you come to work, we're going to connect over my children and your niece and your nephew. Or maybe you do have, if I'm a person with a brain injury, now all of a sudden as a caregiver, oh my gosh, you've got kids. You've now turned into a person. And now we have this very specific engagement over what we mutually value, what we mutually experience as human beings. And that takes place not only within the work environment, but in the world at large. And every time we make one of those visceral or those heart connections, life gets a little richer and a little bit better. And I think that if I can do that in my work environment specifically, I'm far more likely to come to work and do a better job if I really care about you and what's happening. And now all of a sudden, you may not remember that it's your daughter or your son's birthday because of your brain injury, but I do. And it brings me joy, and it brings you great joy when we connect and say, let's go get that birthday card today. Why didn't you pick out what you want? And wow, that's where life happens.
Okay. How does person-centered approach come to life if you're someone who's an hourly worker? You're spending, an hour helping somebody bathe. How does that, I could see if I was that person, it'd be like, well, you know what, I'm just giving her a bath, I'm just gonna, in and out, let's be done. How does that approach of really focusing on the individual come to life in those situations? It sounds, from what you're saying, like it's really a lot of conversation, and it's, acknowledging that this person has their own personality and that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In my world, again, I have this alternate reality, I think, that I live in. And to me, it really doesn't matter, again, whether or not you are an hourly employee, whether you are a personal care attendant, a nursing assistant, whether you're working in a hospital setting where you only see people in a transient way or for a very short period of time and then they're gone. Go back to your own life experiences. You've either personally, you've had the experience personally of being hospitalized or having some kind of illness or injury that has impacted you as an individual or for an immediate family member or somebody you care deeply about. And I think all of us can relate to the caregivers or the nurses or the doctors who really seem to take a personal interest in me or in my loved one. And the reality is that interaction in that acute care setting may only take place over the space of a few minutes, over a few days, and then it's done. And yet there is a distinction between those who make that personal connection, who meet me on my level and engage me as the person requiring the physical care and or intervention, just like someone who has a great experience in a coffee shop. Same thing. That experience of going to the coffee shop, if you just slam that cup of coffee in my face after I've ordered it and don't even make eye contact with me, the coffee isn't going to taste as rich, the aroma isn't going to be as robust, and I'm going to go out the door saying, you know what? I'm not going there again. I don't want to fight the crowd. I don't want to pay the extra money for my designer coffee. But on the other hand, as you hand me that cup of coffee, if you look me in the eye and say, welcome, and would you like the dark roast, the light roast, if you engage me and get me excited about the choice I'm about to make, our transaction only may be, 5 minutes at the most? And I'm out the door, and you've just set me up for a great day because you've noticed me as a human being. If you're an hourly worker, it's no different. You may only be in there for an hour, but it isn't about the amount of time you spend. It isn't about the depth of your conversation. It's about the transparency with which you engage me and the authenticity with which you show me your heart. If you're available to me emotionally, if you're available to me and saying, you know what, I only have an hour today, so we got to rock this thing, but what do you want to do today? I am so excited to be here. The likelihood that I'm going to respond positively to you and I'm going to give you more of myself as the recipient is far greater than if I just show up and say, I've got to give you a bath, we got to do your meds, I'm supposed to do a blood check, let's check your closet because you hoard things, and then I'm out the door. There's no engagement in that. There's no true honoring of me as a person. All of a sudden you've objectified me. So it's not the amount of time and it's not the number of words. It's the authenticity of the connection.
Right?
Wow, thank you.
would you respond if one of your workers said, well, really this person-centered planning thing, I get the concept, but really, it just is too much time? How would you respond to that?
I think you're working in the wrong job. No, seriously, first of all, you have to collect more information. Why are you telling me that? And you know what I will tell you is, authenticity, real, meaningful, deep, abiding, well-rooted relationships take time, they take energy, and yes, they take more of yourself. You have to ante up a higher amount of you, work, activity, you name it. But I think from my perspective, if you really believe that taking time to honor that other individual, whether we're at work, you're at your other second job, whether you are dealing with your family members, or you're dealing with your friends, if you view authenticity, transparency, engagement, and the time and energy and resource and actual work it takes to honor those principles, then truly your values are not aligned with our values. It means so we offer innovative supports to people responding to their hopes and dreams. Our goal is to make life worth living for every single individual we touch, whether they work for us, whether they're employed by us, or they come into our sphere of influence based on their professional activities or even their volunteer activities. We want to be in a relationship with them, and we want to honor them as individuals, and we want them to feel like when they walked in our door that they were here, but when they walk out our door, they're here. They've gained something for having been a part of that activity. And so if you truly, truly believe it's not worth the effort, I could be crass and say, don't let the door hit you on the way out, but really, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
When you look back, I'm sure you have lots and lots of stories. Can you think of one story where really a person was here and through person-centered planning and person-centered services, their life changed? Do you have some examples of that?
I think the difficulty is in choosing from many. I thought about this last night, actually, and the first one that comes to mind, back in 1974, actually 73, there was, so that's really even before the official unfolding of the concept of person-centered planning really emerged as a train of thought. It really didn't, it was formulating in the 70s, it really took hold in the 80s. And again, as I think you referenced earlier, it's a body of thought around how we should design systems and supports for people based on outcomes and not designing systems of services to deliver a specific goal or objective. So this evolution goes back to 1970, the early 1970s. And I had the privilege of working with some people in music and theater, actually. And we did a Christmas play. And in that Christmas play, I handed out scripts. I asked people to read. And I was new. I was in college. I didn't know what I was doing. But in the process of that, I had them read. I had them read the parts. And some people would get up, and they were all people with intellectual disabilities. And they would get up and they would read this section of the script that we had. And whether they stumbled over their words or whether they didn't quite read what was on the page, we kind of got a feel for what their capabilities were as an actor. And in that process, there was one gentleman, and I won't mention his name, but I consider him to be my first mentor. And what he did is he got up and he kind of read the script line by line. And at the end of it, we ended up giving him the lead, actually, and it was one of the staff members that worked at this particular facility. I was an intern, who came up to me afterwards and said, well, you can't give him that part. Well, why not? Because he doesn't know how to read. And I thought, well, how can he not know how to read if he just read the script, which he had done beautifully? And the long story short is that he not only did get that part, he did do a beautiful job. He did know how to read. But out of that, he and about a half a dozen other people with disabilities who had an opportunity to begin the self-advocacy movement began meeting, and they formed a little organization called Advocating Change Together, which is the grandmother and father of the self-advocacy movement in Minnesota and also nationwide. And he went on in 1975 to testify before Congress on a little thing called Public Law 94-142, because he had never been allowed to go to public school. He was old enough that he had been segregated in institutions most of his young life. And by being able to travel to Washington, D.C., and then to testify before Congress, he actually was one of those people testifying in favor of the inclusion of all children with disabilities in public education and in regular classrooms. And he helped shape literally the world as we see it today in education for all citizens with disabilities. And the most stirring part of that story really comes in when he came back. What he said to me is, he called me up and he said, we got to get together for lunch, and we did. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, Terri, I'm not retarded anymore. And in that moment, he rocked my world.
That's a great story.
Yeah, but you can't use it. Oh my gosh, Cliff Poets. Have you seen him speak?
I haven't.
I'll run my mascara. Yeah.
That's a beautiful.
It was an amazing moment because he went from being disabled to an able-bodied person because somebody didn't think that he didn't know how to read because he hadn't been to school. I was raised up in theater. You just go read your part. And that changed his world and mine. Sorry. I love what I do. All right, let me dial it back.
Great.
Stop. Oh, so many stories. You know, I thought that when you got to be postmenopausal, you didn't cry anymore. It's not working for me. Let's see here. Another really good story is about a couple, two people. They're living in a group home, and I mean an ICFMR group home. And this is fairly recently, the last 10 years. So it's well within the boundaries of what we call outcomes and person-centered planning. And they met. And I don't even know where they met. I honestly don't recall. But they came together, and I think it was probably at work or in their day programs, what have you. And they started a conversation. They discovered they liked each other, and they wanted to get together. Only problem is they're both in wheelchairs, so transportation is really quite challenging. But because the staff was committed to their making choices and fostering a relationship, they made it possible for these two people to begin to date. And so they went back and forth between these two homes, and eventually it came to the attention of the parents. And the parents said, absolutely not, this is not acceptable, you know, my child's vulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. And because of the advocacy of the individuals themselves, but also because of that partnership and that relationship that they had with the staff, and the staff were people who knew them well, had worked with them, and quietly, because they were listening to the needs of both the families and the individuals, they were able to say, let's let this thing unfold. And it took a long, long, long time, years. But eventually the families came around, the relationship blossomed and grew, and now those two people are married, they did have a wedding, they do share a household, they are still living in wheelchairs, but they are living the American dream in their own home with their own, what do I want to say, their own home in their own environment of their choosing with the people that know and love them and have been supporting them for a number of years now. And it's a wonderful thing to see, because I think that probably the people whose lives were attached to theirs gained as much out of that whole experience as did they. It really changed their world. Another gentleman who has terrible cerebral palsy, does not have, cannot speak without really struggling, and uses a Dynavox or an other assisted technology to speak, is in a wheelchair. 25 years ago, he came as part of a cleaning crew to our offices, and I've always worked late, and he would come in, and I would strike up a conversation with him, and through his tortured, and I mean tortured, desire to speak, and back then we didn't have a Dynavox, there were no assistive devices at that point, but he had a communication book. He had a couple people with him on the cleaning crew that really cared about him. I found out that he was living in a congregate ICFMR with about 40 other people, 48 other people, and he simply said to me, look in the back of my wheelchair. I pulled out a book of poetry that was absolutely astounding. And so I engaged him about this and found out there were a couple people in his life who had taken the time to learn how to help him with his words. I don't know what his actual intellectual functioning is, but I will tell you, I'm sure it's off the charts. But he's trapped in this physically challenging body and without a voice. In subsequent years, he did get the assisted technology. He did get the voice box, and in the process, the first thing he said to me, I cannot say on tape because he used too many expletives, but he told me in no uncertain terms, why the hell haven't you broken me out of that place? It's been years and I'm still living there. And it was like, I missed that part of the message. And so it took us another 2 years, but we got him out of there, and he has now been living in his own place ever since in the community. And again, people didn't believe, because of his cerebral palsy, that he would be able to live independently or semi-independent living. Semi-independently. Oops. Sorry.
Did you say semi-independently? Nice like that. He can put it in.
You can edit it
Yeah, it's
in.
just that one.
Semi-independently.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Okay.
Wow.
Is there anything else
need to
about
hold for a second?
person-centered?
Do you need to
We
replace?
have 6 minutes.
No, until they get that.
We don't wanna miss
Well,
a
no,
word.
I was gonna talk to
Okay.
her,
Okay.
because this, I don't know that you'd want this, but my experience is that you got two kinds of staff, those who get it and those who don't. And the ones who get it, doesn't matter what the disability is. The ones who have to work at it, they're the ones who, you could have somebody who was completely functional and verbal, and they still wouldn't get it. So that's my aside. Are you ready?
Yep, guys,
Yeah, I'll
switch
put
back this way.
Oh, sorry. I can't sit.
For those who want
It's
to
hard
get
to
it,
sit one spot.
but don't know how.
Right.
Okay, let me think here. You asked the question about, actually Stacy asked the question, how do you do person-centered planning for somebody who is nonverbal? And my first response and my teachable moment is, when you hold a newborn infant, whether you're the grandma or the proud aunt, the sibling, the neighbor, and that newborn infant can't talk, can't walk, is totally dependent on you, how do you discern when that infant isn't crying, they're just in your arms, that they want to be held a certain way? You're looking at a series of cues that are in the way that the baby tenses its body, releases its body, in the way the baby breathes, the way the body moves. It's the way the eyes open and close. It's the respiratory rate. There are so many physical cues, nonverbal cues that infant gives you that allows you to know that, oh, I don't like being held flat, but when I do this and I raise that baby up, the baby says, oh, and now the baby's engaging. Now transfer it forward. We serve people who are completely physically dependent, who are in some cases contracted, and so they require very specific positioning, transferring. They have no language verbal skills in the sense of English, but I would tell you I have yet to meet an individual of any ability level who didn't have very specific ways of communicating. And if you are a staff person and you are attempting to apply the principles of person-centered planning to someone who is nonverbal and is not physically active, is pretty stationary, I've known a lot of very wise DSPs, direct support professionals, who have been able to tell me everything about someone based on their nurturing of that relationship. That person who is their eye contact, the pinning of their eyes, whether their pupils are expanding or contracting, can show delight, horror, sadness, fear, anger, frustration. You can see it all in the pupil of an individual's eye. The pursing of lips, the breathing, again, respiratory rates, and sometimes there are involuntary cues that are critical. People who are totally physically disabled will have muscle spasms at times in response to stimuli, positive or negative. If I'm excited and I'm spastic, I start to get spastic, whereas if you're playing gentle music and you're massaging me and you're helping me to relax so that I can take a nap or I can rest or I can go to sleep at night, when I feel your touch, you can sometimes almost see a grin on my face. I've always said that my favorite person who taught me the most about communicating in life was a gentleman who was completely nonverbal and had spent his entire life in bed. He was so contracted that he had to be prone, and he had respiratory issues, so there was very specific positioning that occurred with him, and yet by walking into his room and greeting him, he could make my week or my month. If I'd had a tough day, or if I'd had a tough series of challenging meetings, or if I was in the middle of a difficult time at work, all I had to do is go visit him. And when I would walk in he couldn't do much, but he would, at the sound of your approach down his hall, even before you hit his door to his bedroom, and he had a beautiful bedroom, big picture window overlooking a wetland, and he would lay in bed and he'd be looking out the window, and when you'd arrive, he would change and his visage would look over to see who was arriving, and he was blind. So he didn't know who was arriving yet, except that he did know. He could tell by your footsteps. He'd never said my name in my life, but when I would walk into that room and he would hear my voice and hear my footsteps, he would acknowledge me, and he would begin to just ever so slightly move himself on the bed, not physically moving his body, but you could see it in the tensing and the relaxing of his muscles, in his jaw. You could see it in his, in the way he would approach me, and he'd give me this beautiful smile, and it would literally bring you to your knees. Phenomenal smile. And it lit up the room, it lit up the world, and it made you feel like you were queen for a day. And the really cool thing is you could start asking him questions, do you want me to rub your feet? And again, with the way he would move his pupils and just his breathing, you could tell when he was saying, yep, I want you to rub my back or rub my legs, or I want he had a favorite ball that played music. Do you want rock and roll? He loved music. Do you want rock and roll? Do you want classical? Do you want jazz? He loved Christmas carols. And there were just so many ways that he would communicate. And he never said a word. And yet I knew exactly what he wanted me to do. And so I've always taken the lessons that he taught me in the silences and in the stillnesses, because he really taught me about his voice and how to hear him very, very clearly.
So one of the things that I'm hearing you say is really caregivers need to be very observant. What are some of the things that you think that people working with individuals who are nonverbal can really cue into if you're not, you haven't worked with this person much, or you're not comfortable working with nonverbal individuals? What are some of the things that they can do to get more comfortable with that?
You have to lean into the pauses. You have to lean into the stillness. And you have to begin to really become observant in a very different way. I used to, when I first started out, I by accident hit on a technique where before I would enter a home, whether it was one that we were responsible for or a family home or what have you, but I would stop and I would pause on the threshold before I had knocked on the door, and I would stop and I would listen. And as you're standing on the threshold, oftentimes you can hear, I call it hearing, you can hear without your ears and you can see without your eyes. And it is in that stillness, in that silence, and in that quiet, you can actually pick up the energy and the activity within that threshold on the other side just by that pause and leaning into that silence. And in that moment, you can tell, is it okay? Is it real active and vibrant? Is it quiet? And in so doing, you can then monitor the way you're showing up, your own body. And being a fairly loud, pretty busy person myself, it was a really good opportunity for me to say, okay, bring it down. And as I knock, instead of going bang, 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 I'm knock, knock, knock. And when the door opens, it's the big smile. And then as you enter, you're making an entrance that is in keeping with the activity level inside. And it's a lower key home. The guys are cool. It's, or it's 3 young women and they've got the music going and everybody's in the living room dancing, or they're in the backyard. And all of a sudden, because you have leaned into that silence and you've become more an observer, you can pick up a lot without having to talk to anyone. You can see it in the status of the space that you've entered. If you're a staff person and you're working with nonverbal people, if the place is a mess, you got a couple of choices. It means that the staff are obviously, something's going on. Is it on a personal level or a professional level? You can, if it's been a meal, is it cleaned up, is it not? You go into where the office is perhaps to punch in or whatever you're gonna do, and you check to see, is there anything in the communication log? Is somebody sick? Maybe everybody's sick, and then things are really chaotic. There's all kinds of cues about the well-being of the people there that you can gain simply by going quiet yourself, being observant, leaning into silences, and then asking questions. Who's in the space that you're entering that you can say, tell me about today, tell me about so-and-so. And then if you apply those same techniques with the individuals that you're supporting, you can also use those same techniques to learn an awful lot about them. if you immediately go up and touch someone who is physically unable to protect themselves and they don't know you, what do? They have a tendency to pull back. But if, on the other hand, you lower your voice, you slow your pace, you regulate your own breathing, in my case, you speak a little more softly, but not as if I'm, speaking to somebody who's, quote, incapable. It's not using small words and slowly, but rather choosing your words to be gentle and to say, well, are you going to invite me into your space? Can I be a part of this moment with you? Hi, my name is Terry. How are you today? Is it okay for me to approach your bed? Thank you. I'm here. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to show you my hand. Can you turn and look at me? They don't turn and look at me. Would you prefer me not to touch you or not to stay by your bed? And then I have to wait. And for me, that's a hard thing to do. But I have to wait, and I have to wait after I'm comfortable waiting, because eventually, if I wait long enough, generally what I find is that that person they're going to get curious, right? And once I catch their eye, if I can smile, generally I can engage them. But I have to take it on their terms, at their pace, and I have to be willing to go that extra mile to say it's worth. A guy named Bob Johnson, he was our maintenance man. He gave us one of the most profound statements we've ever had in this company. As somebody had ripped a toilet off the wall, and it's, screaming, you got to get over here. And he literally put the phone down and let them scream. And when they got done screaming, he picked it back up and they said, okay, can you listen now? And I'm like, why are you not running and going? He said, reach down where the toilet was on the wall and turn the water off. And so you heard silence, and then you heard, turn the water off. And then he put the phone down, and he looked at me, and he said, Terry, sometimes it's good to wait. And really, that was one of those early lessons about leaning into a silence. He knew that by the time he got there, the whole place would have been flooded. But he also knew that there was a water valve that could be turned off and stop. And had he done what my first impression was, stop, drop, and go, think about how much water damage we would have had. Would have been awful. So it's kind of been one of those fun things that we've said in our company ever since. When things get a little tense, sometimes it's good to wait.
Perfect. Is there anything else about person-centered approaches, focusing on the individual, anything like that you want to say that you don't feel like you've touched on? You've done a phenomenal job. Made my job much easier.
Oh, it made the editing process a lot harder. It's too much to work with.
Right.
I don't know about that, but
Oh,
I think I don't know if I said this, and I don't know that it'll make any difference, but person-centered planning isn't something you do at work. I know I touched on that, but person-centered planning is something you do for life. It's about honoring your authentic self and that other person's authentic self. And in the case of the people that we support, it really means valuing them, whoever they are, however they show up, and how they engage you as a staff person. And I would remind you that you come into their life for a fleeting amount of time. Most caregivers don't sign on for life unless they're a family member. And that is why I am so profoundly committed to family members directing care and offering care or support, because they're in it for life. They don't give up when the going gets tough. And so as a caregiver, if you have an opportunity to establish that true, authentic relationship with whoever it is that you are offering support to, make sure that you do that, but then take those very same principles and apply them to every relationship in your life, and I guarantee that life will be richer, will be far richer and far more meaningful. Yeah, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
I think you're wise to do so.
1 minute left on the tape.
Wow.
Wow.
I could make farting noises under my arm.
Thank you, Terri.
Thank you so much.
So,
Outstanding.
well, hopefully you'll get
So-
something.
Oh,
Yeah.
Something.
that's not a risk.
No, I think there's some ways we can
Yeah,
use these
yeah,
throughout.
yeah,
This
see,
person
that's
centered.
what,
'Cause that's what
I
was missing.
I
It's
like
such a-
that.
It's such a
Little
heart connection
snippets.
topic, and so when you're trying, from my perspective, writing about it, it's like,